Season 2, Episode 17.
Journalists, of course, starting calling up and wanting to interview all these presidential candidates. And as it turns out, a lot of these people had no idea that they were candidating for president of Iceland, which is just amazing. Imagine getting that call.
I'm James.
And I'm Pat.
And this is UX Podcast, balancing business, technology, people and society since 2011. And with listeners, new and old, all over the world, from Greenland to Iceland.
Oh, nice one. You picked Iceland.
See, people don't know why that's a nice one yet.
Exactly.
But we're going to get to it, because today is a link show.
Yay! We haven't had one in a while.
No, it's been since... Well, before Christmas we had one, I believe. So a little while. And in the link show, we bring you two articles that Per and I have discovered or been served by an algorithm in some medium or other that has caught our interest and that we want to share with you and talk to you about. And the two of them today, first one is going to be The Lazy Load, Endless Scroll and Colour Slicing Have to Go. Which is an article by Bethany Sadler-Jasmin.
And the second article today is How Do You Accidentally Run for President of Iceland? There we go. There's why Iceland is fun. And this one is by Anna Anderson. Start us off, James.
So the first article for us to chat about today is The Lazy Load, Endless Scroll and Colour Slicing Have to Go. This is written by Bethany Sadler-Jasmin, and who is the global UX design, global UX design lead, solopreneur, burnout coach, and founder of rebelsouldigital.com. And this one, what this article, like so many things we have to work with. This article is about balance, I think you could say. Balance between sufficient choice and feeling comfortable making decisions. And Bethany, she does this in the article in the context of e-commerce and e-commerce websites. So I'll quote a little bit from the beginning. Today's e-commerce experience has more products to scroll through than one would ever imagine looking through in a brick-and-mortar store. Adding lazy loads and colour-sliced products demands users to rely heavily on their working memory to decide what to buy or remember what they've already looked at in a list of hundreds of items. Many users become so overwhelmed they exit the site. So, the subtitle of this article is Hick's Law has gone out the window, especially for neurodivergent users. Now, Hick's Law, for any of us that need a little reminder about which law that is, because, of course, in the world of UX and digital design, we have hundreds of laws that we need to remember and follow all the time. Interesting. That's a kind of... There's a similarity there with the amount of... Yeah, that's a very long list that we need to filter and kind of sort out too.
Maybe Beanton's law would be that we have too many laws.
That could well be Beanton's law. So not Beanton's law, God, you got me going now. Hick's Law. That's the one which says the more choices you present your users with, or people with, I guess, the longer... or even more challenging, I guess, more cognitively challenging it is for them to reach a decision. Yeah. So they can get paralyzed by choice, I guess is another way you could describe that. You get shown too many choices. The Hick's Law itself is an exponential graph that with every additional choice, it becomes more difficult to make a decision.
Yeah, so which leads to decision fatigue, which is the enemy of UX.
Yeah, and things like decision fatigue and, if you're already trying to live your life, and Bethany writes this in the beginning of the article, if you're trying to balance things like, tasks at home, supporting the members of your family, or even, investing time you need into your work to get promoted, or find a job, read the news, doing the shopping, you're constantly basically in a chronic state of information overload. There's too much going on. We're having to juggle so much. And
she does address a lot of factors related to equity, inclusion, accessibility in this article, which I really appreciate as well.
Yeah, no, it's really nice that she brings up a lot of these aspects. And she herself, after being burnt out, as far as I understand it, works herself with coaching people about avoiding burnout or finding a way out from falling into burnout again once you've been burnt. And we do have that opportunity to influence these things so that they aren't overwhelming people. And I mean, I know you've done talks about this, and we've talked about it on the show many, many times. But we often find ourselves in situations in organizations where that's a big ask. We struggle with the organization to get them to buy into what we're suggesting when it isn't the kind of, what seems on the surface, the click maximizing, goal hitting, even conversion maximizing option, because some of these things might be ones that don't immediately increase conversion. Right. Maybe. It's before I get into some more of the details of the article, I mean, there's a good lot of hypotheses baked into this article about ways that maybe you should do it instead, but there's a fair bit of data and stuff backing up the suggestions too. That's me kind of like putting a half disclaimer in, saying, in your organization, you might have arguments about whether these things that we're saying or Bethany's saying is true or not. But
right.
Let's go on to a couple of the things that she specifically highlights. One of them is color slicing. Now,
I actually had never heard of color slicing before. I didn't know it was called that.
No, I didn't realize color slicing was color slicing. But anyway, what Bethany means by color slicing is this device, idea, way in which you present multiple versions of this, effectively the same item, the same product, in different colors, to inflate your inventory, or make you. It's the classic thing of making yourself look big, like a cat kind of being attacked or whatever. Then you make yourself look big by having lots of variations. Like you'd have 15 t-shirts, which is the same t-shirt, but you've got red t-shirt, green t-shirt, blue t-shirt.
And those all appear as separate items as you're scrolling down the page.
Yeah. As opposed to the opposite, well, not opposite necessarily, but the alternative way of dealing that might be that you would present the variations as product options when you're on the product page.
Yeah.
So you would have a generic t-shirt product, which maybe showed different colours there at that point, maybe not, I don't know. But then when you actually go to the product page, then you can have and on a clothes shop you would have maybe little squares underneath that you could click on to see different variations or colours and so on.
Okay. One thing I actually noticed or thought about as I was reading this was, of course, I've also been subjected to what I now know is called color slicing. And it would make sense to me if all those items were placed next to each other. So here comes the T-shirt, and here are the variations of that T-shirt as I'm scrolling down, placed next to that original item.
Yeah.
But what tends to happen is the same product, the same type of clothing, is in different colors, is appearing at different places as I scroll down. So it doesn't even make sense. I don't even know it's connected to that other one. It's the same product, just a different color.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point there about the thing about making sense.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things may not make sense to the people who are at the other end of it, because when you're dealing with humans and the diversity of humans that we have, then there's a lot of sense making that has to be done to look through these lists. Baymard Research, who are an excellent resource for numerous things to do with, especially e-commerce, in their testing they've done, they've seen that users become overwhelmed with the number of variations of products when they're listed as separate items. So their advice is actually you don't do it like that. What Bethany hooks this on is something called the goal gradient effect. which I suppose affects laws. They're all kind of the same thing, aren't they? Well, this one, the goal gradient effect, this is where we need to feel that a goal is achievable. So when faced with these kind of very long, but very similar or kind of hard to take in lists of products and their variations, you have that feeling of helplessness ready from the start. You've kind of been overwhelmed already from the product listing point, so you don't feel like it's going to be possible for you to make a choice because you just don't know how to manage this infinite amount of choice that you've been presented with.
Right.
So so boiling down these things can be a really big ask, and you've already mentioned Bethany brings up the accessibility aspect of this, and even the wellness side of it. And I think it's really nice that she highlights this because, of course, we always try to highlight the accessibility side of things. It's not easy. The complexity of if you do have this, I mean, you argue, okay, filters, we might do some filtering, but designing filters well, or even using filters to whittle things down to a manageable number, that can be challenging to get right. It can also be challenging to use. And if you are neurodiverse, or you are in need of assisted technology, or if you're going to listen to, try using a keyboard or try using a screen reader to whittle some of these choices down using filters. Sometimes,
honestly, James, just yesterday I was in my tool for sending out newsletters, and I was trying to find a person's email address, and I was searching, but there was a filter on that I didn't notice until I was getting frustrated. Why can't I find this person? But there was another filter on for another list, so I couldn't find that person because they were not in that list that the filter was on. So I was like, yes, I stumble upon these things constantly where I'm stuck in a filter that I hadn't realized was on.
Well, I will actually come to after I've gone through one more thing that Bethany talks about. She does have some recommendations herself about what we could do to improve all this. But I'll move on though to another one of the things she mentions, and that's the whole thing with infinite scroll, doom scrolling, endless scroll. Beth herself uses the phrase lazy load a bit in this article, but we have many phrases for this thing, and this is that thing where you scroll and something else appears. 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 You scroll. Okay.
And sometimes there's a loader. Sometimes it happens instantly. It can be different, but you're like, what's happening? And then all of a sudden there's like 10 new items on the page.
Well, no, but I mean, this in particular she's talking about is the infinite one, where no interaction is required. It basically
no interaction.
Because
you're not even noticing it. You're not even noticing that things are loading.
But effectively, you just keep on going. So you've got no anchorage. You've got no way of you can lose context of where you are or where you were. It can be difficult to go back to somewhere where you once were. I like that one 10 items back, but all this gets very spatially difficult to manage. And it's something. Doom scrolling is something that research is highlighting. Every now and then now we're seeing articles and papers come out that talk about the impact of doom scrolling, infinite scroll on mental health. We've generally seen it in connection with social media, and children or youths, younger people on social media, that, with things like TikTok, Instagram, so on, that it's, it keeps on going. It never ever stops. And that is a problem, even bigger problem for younger people, because of their inability to limit themselves and to monitor and stop engaging. I mean, these aspects that you aren't mature enough when you're younger to realise what you're doing. There was actually this. It's got brought up again by a paper I think last month. I can link to it in the show notes by the American Psychologists Association. I think it was. I read about complaining yet again or highlighting the problem with doom scrolling. I can. Some of these things you can guess why they seem like good ideas.
It's easier to build one page with everything, and you just stuff it all in there. So it's almost like having one rack in your store, and it's never ending. And you just browse one rack, and you figure out, there was one item back that I really liked, but how do I find it again? No idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the whole thing of like, when you've got you here, we'll just keep on feeding you while you need to do something else, because you're so scared of that, of the cost of that extra interaction. You know, as you say, we're like friction. I mean, if you put anything in the way, it's seen as a scary thing for a lot of companies. I go, oh, we've got them here now. We don't want to lose them.
And I keep hearing this, and I heard this actually the other day. We have to reduce the number of clicks. And when you have someone in a senior position saying you need to reduce the number of clicks, that is what you've done with Infinite Scroll, because now you don't have to click anymore. So goal met.
It's in a certain narrow context, that might seem like a good idea, and you might be able to run A/B testing or experiments that prove that it works better depending on what you've set your goal as. But we do have the data and evidence out there that doom scrolling is not great for your health, and you've got to ask yourself: do you want to contribute to the mental unwell-being of your customers, or even lose certain customers, because you've offered them no guardrails when it comes to browsing your products. So, designing a better solution. Beth has 3 concrete bits of advice that she gives to improve the balance of your product listings, I guess, or how the well-being that you generate from your product listings. One of them was just cut down your product list.
Yeah, I love that.
And I like that too. And it's this is just not kind of like you'd have to argue with marketing probably about this one, but have less products.
It made me think of when I go to lunch restaurants. I so appreciate lunch restaurants that have like 5 items rather than ones that have 50.
Shouldn't it be 3? Isn't that didn't we learn that 3 is the magic number with these things?
But 3 that I like.
I think though adding in my own little one here is I think because it is going to be a battle to get the products cut down. Because if you're in an organisation that is selling products, then to get that number reduced is going to involve touching on so many aspects of your organization, probably. So that's a kind of heavy lift to go in there and dismantle, product ranges and so on. So it might not be something you can do immediately or do quickly. So we can work with better filtering. And this generally is something which is promoted by Baymed and other people as a good thing. That if you do have a large number of products, then offer some simple way of quickly reducing that to something more manageable. Without going into kind of nitty-gritty details about how you build filters, you'd want to reduce the number down. Sure, you might get into arguments still about, we've given them too little choice. They won't understand anymore that we have more available. No, trust your users. If you've tested this and built it well to offer them helpful choices to narrow things down, then you'll be respecting their decisions, and you'll be showing them something more relevant.
It's almost like I would want this message: hello, we have 500 items. How can we reduce that for you? And ask the questions to help me reduce it. Because something, especially when I'm looking for clothes online, I realize that I have to click in on items to realize that, it's not available in my size. Why can't I just select my size and just show the items that are available in my size? It's so simple, but I see that in very few stores. This actually got me thinking about so many different ways to just cut down the product list. It even made me think, just reduce it randomly. I just want 10 items, and that's enough for me, please.
Yeah. Well, you're right there, Per, about just when it comes to clothing. You rarely see a website that goes kind of like from the beginning, what size are you?
Yeah, what color do you like?
Yeah, okay, you have to present that in the right way so you don't straight away scare people thinking, but I don't know what colour I want. There are risks, but exactly. You might be buying for a friend and so on. So yes, I get it. It might not be, might be always best to leave the options open and let them choose.
It's not that you have to go through these steps, but it's something that allows you to reduce the numbers. Because some people, remembering what you said at the start, absolutely, there will be some people that they want it this way. They want to be able to scroll because that's how they're accustomed to it, and they just like it.
Yeah, and Bethany makes that point. There are people who are going to like option A or option B. Yeah. It's not going to be, one size does not fit all. But, balancing. We have to balance. Strategic product slicing was something else that Bethany mentions. And this is a key thing, with the user in mind. And always when we get advice, things like strategic product slicing, and then when you have to point out with the user in mind. It's amazing that we're still having to write that kind of thing.
Exactly.
In 2024, but that it's I know exactly what she means, because often it's marketing in mind, or it's the inside out. It's how your organization is structured that drives product slicing, rather than what is needed or wanted at the other end, at the other side, or even what your competitors are doing is what's driving it, rather than you offering something more useful.
Exactly. And another thing she actually notes as well, which we should not need reminding of either, is people want to know where they are. Where am I? Where am I within this large data set that you're presenting to me? That is what we need to help people with at all times. It's navigation. And in structure. I mean, we know that from an accessibility point of view, then you need to have things like breadcrumbs, clear navigation, and showing where you are. So, we have multi-step forms, and we know that they're good because they allow people to understand, when am I done?
Third bit of advice that we've already touched on a little bit, is using load more or pagination. Yeah. Now, there are effectively three ways that you deal with these kind of product listings. One of them is your infinite scroll, which listeners have already gathered that we're not big fans of that. But I will now come in with a place where I think it can be okay. It's when you've got, and this is kind of amusingly, I guess, infinite scroll I think works if they aren't an infinite amount of items. So you've got a relatively small and finite number of items, then it might improve the performance of the page that you don't load them all at once. So you actually scroll, and then you'd allow maybe, I don't know, I'm going to just pick 20, 30 or whatever. So you've got a kind of quite a small number. Then it may be okay to allow it to load automatically when you scroll down. But generally, when you're dealing with product sites,
then it's not endless, James.
Exactly, that's why I said it was amusingly.
Yeah.
It's the endless scroll. The best application of it is when it's not endless. It's actually just a staggered scroll. But when you're talking about hundreds of items, big inventories of stuff, then you've got your load more option, which you mentioned when you've got to click on a button to load more. That's actually a much better solution on mobile, because you've paused, you've come to a point, and then you've asked the user, okay, right, we're in this together. Should we carry on for another 50? And they go, yeah, okay. Click the button, you go on. So you're partnering up with your user, and you're kind of doing that. You're giving them a choice, and you're respecting the choice, and you're moving onwards. And if they don't want to do any more, they don't click the button.
What I loved about you saying that, let's load another 50. It made me immediately think, well, why don't I have 3 buttons? Load 10, load 20, load 50, and just give me more control.
Yeah, you could do that. But works on mobile. But it's not as maybe good on desktop. I think on desktop, then pagination, the old and tried and tested thing, is actually quite a good one to use. That said, Google's not using it just now. They can have come and gone. Sometimes they have pagination, sometimes don't. And just now, for me, it's infinite scroll.
I'm very confused about Google and what they're doing.
Oh, well, that's another podcast.
It's fantastic. Let's move on to Iceland. Okay, so this is, of course, it starts out humorous, but when you start diving deeper, you realize, well, what is this giving an example of, really? So this article is written by Anna Anderson, and she's a creative, collaborative content designer. Lots of experience of writing and editing, but she's also an Icelandic to English translator. And when I visited her website, I found out she once knitted a sweater. And I love these little tidbits of information that people provide on their websites. And
only once.
I think only once, actually.
Oh,
Yes.
right.
Well, that's how she put it.
I think that's even more interesting
Yeah.
because, like, what was so dramatic about knitting it that caused it to be only once?
And she did that on Iceland as well. You'll want to visit annaanderson.com for more of those stories. But we are today looking at one of her most recent articles. How do you accidentally run for president of Iceland? So framing this, Iceland is a country and an island with just under 400,000 people. So that is the entirety of the population of this country. And to run for president of Iceland, you need to be an Icelandic citizen, at least 35 years old, and have 1,500 endorsements. And the thing that is new this year is that they are putting this online, the application for candidating as a president of Iceland.
Yeah, for registering your intention to run.
Yep. So.
Or candidacy.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of collecting all those signatures on paper, the old-fashioned way, people are just going to a website, a web address, and they're submitting. You're applying. How did you put it?
You're putting forward. You're putting forward your candidacy.
Right.
You're trying to. You're saying, like, I'd like to run.
Right.
Please endorse me so I can run.
Right. So I'm on there. And, of course, I need my 1,500 endorsements. So I'm on social media, and, of course, I'm posting this link as well, telling people, please go there and endorse me. Now, the interesting thing that is happening this year is that usually there are about 9 candidates on the ballot. And this year, to date, when she wrote this article, I forgot the date of it.
82, it says.
Yeah, I forgot, but
In
when did she
April,
write the article? Yeah.
It's end of April. And I just want to point out, Per, is that the period for applying to stand has now ended because they're actually having the vote in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Just in case anyone wanted to. All the Icelandic people listening would be rushing out there to register.
But when she wrote this, 82 people were collecting endorsements. And as she wrote, including a comedian, a model, the world's first double-arm transplant receiver, and my Aunt Helga.
Excellent.
Yes, and that the Aunt Helga is not a mistake. But it turns out journalists, of course, starting calling up and wanting to interview all these presidential candidates. And as it turns out, a lot of these people had no idea that they were candidating for president of Iceland, which is just amazing. Imagine getting that call. So how does this happen? So it turns out the page where you apply to be a candidate and also supply your endorsement for a candidate is the same web page. So just there, you kind of realize, well, hang on, how did that happen? And to top it off, there's actually at the top of that page, there's a login button. That is when you want to submit your candidacy. And you have to scroll down below that to see a list of the candidates that you want to endorse, where you just go and endorse the candidate that you want. And what seems to be happening is that, or did happen, is that a lot of people they got the link from a candidate to endorse them. They went there and saw the big blue login button. They clicked that, and when they logged in with their national digital ID for Iceland, apparently they now submitted their candidacy. So a lot of people have been doing this unknowingly.
Hold on, Per. So right, we've got to pause a little bit here now. So we've got a web page on a government website to do with an election, and it's got multiple like primary goals, I guess, with this page, depending on which target audience or which kind of group of users that will be coming to this page are. And the way this page is presented makes it next to impossible for me to understand the context from my perspective.
Right, because you have to imagine that you're seeing someone you know, perhaps, saying on social media, please click this link and endorse me. And you go there. The main thing you see is a login button, and you assume, well, I'm going to press the login button to endorse the person who just asked me to endorse them. I mean, it's quite simple, really.
Yeah. There's actually a screenshot in the article of the original webpage in English. I think, as I had a little look at the Icelandic government website, they do have a lot of information in English.
Yeah.
So I guess there was an English version of the page. So maybe the Icelandic wording for some of this stuff was not exactly the same as the English, or even worse.
Yeah. You never know.
Obviously, because I guess most of the people that registered by accident, they must have been Icelandic, because that's a requirement of running. And I'm going to guess that a lot of them spoke Icelandic and were reading the Icelandic version.
Yeah. So, of course, after all these journalists called these people up and they said, well, hang on, I'm not candidating as a president. So they realized they had to change the webpage. So Digital Iceland quickly redesigned the page. They created a separate one for registering to collect endorsements.
No. Who'd have thought?
It seems so simple. They kept the link at the bottom of the page, so they switched it around, of course. So if you get a link to the page to endorse people, there's a list of candidates to endorse. But at the very bottom, if you want to collect endorsements, you click that. And interestingly, I almost missed this the first time I read this article, is that since these changes were made, the list of candidates has continued to grow. So this did not stop everything. It just probably made it, the trickle inflow of candidates a bit smaller.
Well, also you've got the whole thing where the amount of media attention that this received, it became a lesson in democracy that many people wouldn't have realised that it was open to any citizen to register. To take part. And now it was you didn't have to do loads of forms and go to some kind of office to register or whatever. You could do it online. So a combination of things here meant that it was more democratically open, and they'd fixed the usability, and it was more clear of what you did when. But absolutely fascinating that, I mean, how, you ask yourself, how could this happen? You know, that's something that sadly, Anna can't answer from her article, I've tried to do a little bit of hunting to see if I could find anything more of a reveal about kind of the process up to the first version, and I couldn't find anything. But being one who's quite happy to speculate, I
go for it, James.
Yeah, well, I can just thinking about how sometimes it can be. I mean, you're working in teams, and sometimes you're working with engineers or developers, and maybe they have very little interest in the actual end product. Sometimes they maybe not. They're not going to worry or question what they're going to build. They're just going to follow the card story. Right. Whatever's kind of like,
there's
the backlog.
Specification of some sort.
It's formed in some way, in some tool. They've got to a thing, and they need to make this thing, and it needs to be delivered during this round of development. And, if that thing says, register to be a candidate kind of thing.
Yeah.
That might be the driving force. So they've not really thought about it. And other things are getting added as B tasks. Even though the main task was registering to be a candidate, because that is a story that had to be, that is a flow, a journey that has to be catered for.
And there's even a case where people could argue, well, it's much easier if we all we have to do is communicate one URL, one web address instead of two. It's easier if there's one web address and all people go there. That's much easier. So, I mean, there are multiple reasons where I can see where people are actually arguing for this being a good idea.
And developing wise, you can't do, there's no point, you're not going to bring to the top of the backlog display candidates first, because you've got to have candidates to display. So, of course, registering to be a candidate is going to come earlier on. And, with the way dates fall and so on, presumably the thing saying be a candidate has to come out first.
Right.
So,
plus there's a database request. A database request takes time. So you want the database request to be lower down the page because the static content loads faster at the top.
Yeah. So we don't know the backstory.
No.
But
we're good at speculating.
We're good at speculating. And what we can learn from this speculation is, it's the classic thing of multiple, this one page can have different users, like we touched upon in the first article about you've got different contexts. You're a human like everyone else, and you've got different ideas when you look at pages. But also, the need for that step back and holistic think when you're designing these things. That you might be in your team bubble, or your kind of like task bubble or story bubble, or whatever you want to call it, where you're tasked with developing a particular feature. But you can't, from a user experience point of view, you can't separate it from the whole.
Yeah.
And here we've become separated from the whole, and we haven't really given the thought and attention that the entire process and variations of the process need to be considered.
There's also this aspect, I mean, going further than just the UX and the design, but systems thinking. I mean, you were almost touching upon this, but from a democratic perspective, from a democracy perspective, should becoming a presidential candidate be as free and easy as sending an email? You might argue, well, that's democratic. That gives everybody a chance. But should everything be digitalized? Should there at least be some sort of friction? There I go again. To make sure that people actually take a step to think, to actually make sure that they are serious about this thing. Well, because what I'm assuming, as well as you were thinking as well, now that it became so easy and people were seeing that you're getting all this press, of course I'm just going to go in and submit my candidacy. Why not? What do I have to lose?
Yeah, you're quite right, and we see that. I mean, in most democracies, there are checks and balances in place to stop things kind of spiraling out of control, because an infinite amount of candidates, going back to infinite scroll there, is not going to be a good thing for democracy, because you would drown in not only the administration around it, but also the choice. Again, back to our first article, you would be overwhelmed by the choice. Here in Sweden, we have what's called the 4% rule when it comes to representation in parliament from a particular political party. You can have opinions whether that's a good or bad thing, but one of the reasons behind a political party needs to have 4% of the vote in order to have representation in parliament is to keep a parliament efficient. That if every party had one parliamentarian, it would be almost unmanageable, because who would form a government when you've got to kind of have hundreds of individuals get together? So you have guardrails again in place to help democracy run efficiently but still be democratic.
That's a good analogy. Actually, when I was looking online, I saw people react to this story, and in many countries, people actually don't understand or know or are aware of that people in countries like Sweden and also Iceland have these digital IDs, which means, because people were reading the story and thinking, well, how can they make it that easy? They think, well, just going to a website, filling in a form, and you're a candidate. But actually, you do have to identify yourself digitally, and you are the only person. So they have verified the identity of the person, and they are verifying the identity of each person endorsing as well. So just to make that clear, if anybody is wondering.
Good point. So it was quite nice there, Per, that we actually managed to inadvertently link these two articles together in some aspects.
Now I'm drawing a blank. What
I'm saying about infinite scroll. I made a couple of analogies.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Infinite scroll and so on, and kind of friction. We touched on some of the similar UX concepts, but drew them from two different sources: e-commerce websites and applying to be president of Iceland, or candidate to be president. Our work is never done.
Oh, you've put some recommended listening for us in the show notes.
Yeah, well, I knew full well that we'd be getting into friction. And I knew full well we'd probably mention the fact that you've mentioned friction an awful lot over the years. Well, both of us, but you in particular. And on top of that, you have presented, you've had a talk about friction.
Way back in Lisbon at UXLX, it was. Fairy Tale UX. And you interviewed me.
I did. We had Val Head and you on that show. And, I interviewed you about your talk, Fairy Tale UX. It's episode 133. So sorry, you will have to doom scroll to get back to that, or you just click in the show notes where it will be linked.
So if you want James and Per, us, as part of your next conference, event, or in-house training, we are offering workshops, talks, and courses to inspire and help you grow as individuals, teams, and organizations. Get in touch by emailing hey@uxpodcast.com. Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
James, what do you do if you're afraid of speed bumps?
Oh, I don't know, pal. What should I do if I'm afraid of speed bumps?
You slowly get over it.
Oh.